All right, what's going on, everyone? We got a lot to get into, so let's get started. Beginning with notable battlefield losses in Ukraine, we have the first footage of the confirmed destruction of a U.S.-supplied Mike 142 HIMARS launcher being utilized by the armed forces of Ukraine. It looks like, and I've got some videos and pictures that I'll share here, looks like the launcher is parked on the edge of a field and was targeted by what is likely a single Russian Iskander missile, which resulted in munitions cook-off of the HIMARS. Now, as a former HIMARS battery commander, I have been pretty surprised at how effective this weapon system has been in this war. It's not all that new. We've had this for quite a while. The technology involved here is not new in any way, shape, or form. So, of course, it was useful to Ukraine. That wasn't really a surprise. It was a bit of a shock that this was so effective at still, to this day, targeting Russian forces well behind the line of contact. And Russia has had such a hard time identifying, striking, and destroying these launchers. Now, there have been 39 HIMARS platforms, high mobility artillery rocket system platforms, delivered to Ukraine. This one here is the first one destroyed. There might have been two others that were damaged. It's hard to tell based off what we've seen if those are back in service or if they've had to be rotated out for new parts, anything like that. Also, another part of this that doesn't get a lot of attention is that Ukraine also has around 25 M270 MLRSs, which fire the same rockets as the HIMARS. It's the same munition. It just hasn't gotten nearly the same attention as the HIMARS. I'm not exactly sure why. So the MLRS, the M270, it's firing the same rockets, has the same capabilities. The only difference is it carries twice as many. A pod of six or a pod of two pods of six instead of one pod of six on the HIMARS, and it's tracked instead of wheeled. But at the end of the day, it's the same rockets, the same guided rockets going out attacking Russian positions. So overall, Ukraine still has 63 out of 64 of the 227mm MLRS platforms that remain in service with the Ukrainian military. Then we also have Russian footage that came out this week showing another U.S.-supplied Abrams tank being hit by an ATGM on the northern edge of Berdichi, which I'm probably mispronouncing, but this marks the third U.S.-supplied Abrams that was destroyed or at the very least damaged along the Avdiivka axis. So the U.S. has provided 31 Abrams main battle tanks to Ukraine. We've seen 3 so far that are either damaged and or destroyed. It's just hard to tell the full battle damage assessment from a lot of these videos. We've seen countless examples on both sides of this war where a tank or a BMP or something is hit by multiple munitions. Maybe it runs over a mine and gets hit with ATGM or an FPV, and the camera cuts out, but from another angle, you actually see the thing drive off. So I'll say at this point, it's confirmed that 3 Abrams have been hit, possibly destroyed, at the very least damaged. Then shifting over to Russian losses, Ukraine says they downed another Russian Su-34 on March 2nd, which is something like 14 aircraft shot down in 2 weeks, which is substantial, but there's not a lot of evidence to back up the majority of these shootdowns, especially those Su-34s. But there was an interesting thread that I thought was worth running through here on Twitter by PSO1, and the reason it's interesting is it goes through a handful of satellite imagery over Russian airfields showing a lack or a decrease in the Su-34 platforms that are showing up there. Take it for what it's worth. We still haven't seen a lot of burned out wreckage or even confirmation on Russian Telegram channels that multiple aircraft have been shot down. However, this I thought was notable enough to bring up. In the thread, he says, we all know that within 15 days, the air defense forces of Ukraine shot down 11 Russian Su-34 fighters in the east and southeast of the territory of Ukraine. The fact that only 2 planes were shot down was visually proven, because the planes were shot down in the very rear of the Russian occupiers. And although there is no particular evidence, the results are visible. The sky over Ukraine is practically clear, and the number of aerial bombs has halved. I have heard that from a handful of Ukrainian Telegram channels, reports from soldiers on the front saying that all of a sudden Ukrainian aircraft are operating much closer to the front lines than they have in a long time, which would suggest that the Russian aircraft in those areas of the front have decreased. Also hearing more from Ukrainian soldiers that the aerial bombs, the FAB-style bombs, has decreased relatively in the last couple weeks. That coincides with the claims of multiple Russian jets being shot down. Now, I do want to say that the pro-Russian Telegram channel Fighter Bomber has in the past pretty regularly confirmed the various shoot downs that Ukraine puts out and then Russia, the government, kind of sits on for a little while. Fighter Bomber has regularly confirmed those, and they did confirm the A-50 back on February 23rd, but they haven't confirmed anything since. So just keep that back in mind throughout all of this. Now, running through the satellite imagery, they have the first airfield here where they say at least one Su-34 did not return to its base. In general, the Su-34 should not have been on the airfield in general, but at the beginning of the war, 4 units were relocated there. One of them was possibly shot down over Mariupol. Then the second picture, the Kursk airport, again, probably struggling with that pronunciation. They say that probably 4 Su-34s did not return to their base. The situation is identical to the first. Before the war, Su-34s were not based here, but recently they appeared and then magically disappeared. The third image of a different airfield, they say 1 Su-34 did not return to its base. There should be about 20 in total at this airfield, but most of them are not visible in the pictures. So these pictures, they say, should be treated with some degree of skepticism. They say in general, 6 Su-34s out of the 11 declared did not return to their bases, and in addition, another 8 Su-34s were relocated to new bases to replenish losses somehow. So, you got to be skeptical with any of these claims presented by either side in this conflict or any conflict. It's entirely possible that some of these aircraft are just not visible to satellite imagery, moved inside of hangars or moved to other airfields for regular ongoing maintenance. But it is notable that some of the airfields being used to house these Su-34s striking inside of Ukraine in the past few days and weeks have shown a notable decrease in those platforms sitting out on their runway. So again, I would say we're still waiting for absolute confirmation of those Ukrainian claims of the 14, 15 shootdowns in the past couple weeks, but this was something worth noting. Then earlier this week, Ukrainian military intelligence announced and put out video footage that I'll show here, saying that they used maritime drones, unmanned surface vessels, to attack the Sergey Kotov near the Kerch Strait, which connects the Sea of Azov to the Black Sea. Now, the striking and subsequent sinking of this Russian warship was confirmed across a handful of pro-Russian Telegram channels, and most of those added that the ship's crew was able to evacuate safely. So the Russian Telegram channel here, named Two Majors, said the patrol ship Sergey Kotov, which is on combat duty in the Kerch Strait, was attacked by 5 unmanned boats of the Ukrainian armed forces. They say the ships are not equipped with the necessary means of protection. There is no air defense or anti-submarine defense. Only 2 machine guns are catastrophically insufficient for hitting group targets. They said by 3 o'clock at night, most of the crew was evacuated to tugboats. 3 in total of these tugboats were involved. And it was decided to drag the ship to port. However, the late-started struggle for survivability was due to waiting for orders from the command. And he really harps on this, saying the higher command within the either Black Sea Fleet or the overall Russian military kind of sat on their hands and wasn't exactly sure what to do, maybe hadn't confirmed this, was waiting for more information. And all of that time, the hours that it took for them to take action likely resulted in this ship sinking and not being effectively towed back to port. He said, by morning, Sergey Kotov began to sink. For now, unfortunately, we have to admit that the entire fleet has no practice in correcting its own mistakes. The same problems arise systematically. Going out on patrol alone, without the necessary equipment and surveillance, means at night nothing has yet changed. He says, but the tactics of the armed forces of Ukraine have undergone changes. Now they attack at night in groups of up to 10 drones in the absence of the necessary countermeasures and poor visibility. This is quite logical, which results in lost ships every time. There's a handful of these channels on both sides that I think are worth checking in on from time to time because they want their side to win, right? Two Majors is very, very pro-Russian. They want Russia to win this war, but they're also critical of their own forces when they make mistakes. And they're pointing out here, hey, Russia is not adapting to this unmanned surface vessel drone threat in the Black Sea. And in turn, what he's saying is every time Ukraine puts together a group of 10 or more of these drones to attack a target, they're going to be successful. They're going to continue sinking Russian warships until Russia adapts to this newer threat. Now, on a bit of a side note, I started a second channel. The new video just went up a few hours ago. Very different from what I'm doing here. A lot of this coverage, whether it's about Ukraine or Gaza, at the end of the day, it's all about death and destruction, killing, and the awful things that human beings can do to one another, and that can take a bit of a toll. So I started a second channel that's just positive. It's the same style of reporting, kind of news, but looking at events over the course of the last week of human beings doing just wonderful, good things to one another to kind of remind us that there are a lot of good people in the world, and for the most part, that's who we're surrounded by. So I'll put the channel here in the video and link it in the description below if interested. Just a little bit of a cleanse every so often, if you will. As we spend so much time talking about war and conflict, I thought it was good to step out and maybe recognize that overall people are still good. Then on Friday, Margarita Simonyan, the head of Russian state broadcaster Russia Today, posted a recording to her Telegram in which the head of the German Luftwaffe, their air force, discussed the possibility of deploying German Taurus missiles in Ukraine with other senior officers. In the 30-minute conversation, they also discussed whether Ukraine could attack Russian targets without the participation of German soldiers and how many missiles could be delivered to Ukraine. So you can see why Russia would want to leak that information. There's a lot of debate going on inside of Germany right now about whether or not these Taurus missiles are going to be supplied to Ukraine. So in the middle of that debate, Russia acquires a conversation where Germany is saying not only how many could we possibly send to Russia, but kind of hinting that they might have to help Ukraine with either the targeting or weaponeering to strike certain targets. Of course, Russia is going to be interested in that information, right? Now, the interesting piece here is that it didn't take some fancy intel work. This was being discussed on WebEx, just open communications, which is relatively easy to hack, at least compared to, secure government communications platforms, which kind of brings a couple things to light. First off, how many of these top secret classified German military meetings are going on in open forums like WebEx? That's a problem at baseline. And if that is happening, it's likely that Russia was able to pick up on quite a few other conversations. And this is just the first time they decided, you know what, this time we're going to put it out there. Of course, that is interesting when you think about it, because that means that Russia is letting everybody know, letting Germany know in this case, that they have been able to tap into their communications. So Germany is likely, one would assume, going to shift how they conduct their meetings and no longer do it on open WebEx platforms, but in more secure means. That is going to shut off Russia's ability to continue to monitor these communications. So Russia viewed this conversation about the Taurus missiles as being so significant that it was worth essentially burning this source, if you will. That's notable. However, within the German government, they warned that additional further recordings could be leaked, which I think is a safe assessment at this point. He said it can be assumed that the conversation was deliberately leaked by Russia at this point in time with a specific intention, namely to prevent the Taurus delivery by Germany. I think that's fair. Again, you have to, in any time a country has gathered intelligence on another nation, it's not always in their benefit to just release it out in the public, because you don't know. As soon as you do that, you lose access to that channel. Who knows if the next conversation would have been even more valuable. So again, there was a specific intent to doing this, and Russia has taken a bit of a gamble releasing this information now and giving up that access to information that they once had. Then we've got some interesting poll data here in the United States that I thought was worth running through. This was an AP NORC, N-O-R-C Center poll of 1,102 U.S. adults conducted between 22 and 26 February. And there were a couple pieces to this poll where they compared current numbers to historic numbers earlier in the conflict that I thought were interesting. One of the questions, they said, in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, do you favor, oppose, or neither favor nor oppose the United States doing each of the following? And one of the questions was providing weapons to Ukraine. In that poll in February, 50% favored providing weapons to Ukraine and 26% opposed, which is about in line with what I see in most polls these days. The questions are usually a little bit different, but on or about 50% favoring sending additional weaponry, military equipment to Ukraine. That's a general downward trend since April 2022, when 61% favored sending weapons to Ukraine and 17% opposed. But that downward trend kind of stabilized about a year ago, and it hasn't really changed since January of 2023. So for all the conversation, the news of we should or we shouldn't, all the conversation leading up to the coming presidential election, it looks like, broadly speaking, the support for sending additional weapons to Ukraine has somewhat stabilized around that 50% in favor, 25, 26, 27% opposing. Then the second one was asking whether or not people favored sending U.S. troops to defend a U.S. NATO ally if they were attacked by Russian forces. So real quick, not Ukraine. This is not saying, should we send troops to Ukraine? It's asking about active NATO allies that are attacked by Russia. Should the United States step in to intervene? The most recent numbers there, 56% favored, 19% opposed, which is pretty similar to April of 22 when this was first asked, where 60% favored and 20% opposed. So either way you read that, just over half of the American public asked this question favors the United States essentially adhering to our obligations in NATO. I think there's probably a couple different ways to read through that. One is an overall dissatisfaction with NATO, maybe a belief that the United States should not be involved, or this is not something we need to be concerned with. And the second probably has to do with not understanding the treaty obligations. I don't know if that would make the answers to this better or worse, but an attack on one is an attack on all. So if Russia attacks one of our NATO allies, we have a treaty obligation to help defend them. I don't know if that is understood entirely, or if it is understood, does this just mean that people are not super in favor of NATO as it sits today? But that's all I've got for now. Again, I'll link in the description the second channel, kind of a positive, uplifting message, good news stories about humans doing positive things for one another to kind of, a bit of a cleanse from the nasty war, killing, death, and destruction that we talk about here every day. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.